Chapter 1. A New Beginning. E is alive. I did it. I managed to save your boy's life. After the midwife triumphantly said those words, the room exploded in cheers and tears of joy. The people in the room were hugging each other, and the mother in turns. Meanwhile, Derek lied limp in the midwife's arms, looking left and right, trying to determine how bad his current situation was. Well, what do we have here? The bedridden woman is clearly this body's mother. She definitely needs a bath. After delivery, the sheets were stained with blood, dirty wine, and feces. The crying, rough-looking man should be the father. I wonder if he is crying for my sake, or just because he was afraid of losing his wife. I bet the second one. It's likely for me to have an older sibling. This doesn't bode well. Suddenly, another woman entered the bedroom, bringing with her a little boy and a girl who raced to the bedridden woman. Oh, damn it. This is even worse than I thought. So far, I only have two possible choices. Option 1. Grow into this large family, fighting every day for the few available resources. Malnourishment is most definitely a given. Then, when I am old enough, I would be forced to work with my relatives, get married, and have children. Option 2. Wait until I am tall enough to grab sharp objects, put an end to my misery, and take another spin at reincarnation, hoping for a better outcome. I think I'll go with option number 2. While Derek was thinking, the room had become quieter. The midwife had already finished cleaning the newborn and had wrapped him up in a clean cloth. During all that time, Derek neither moved nor cried. Nana, what's wrong with the baby? Why is he not crying? It has never happened before. The mother was so worried that she ignored the pain and tried to get up. Shush, child. Don't you dare move. We still have to heal you. The midwife's tone did not leave space for a reply. I've delivered dozens of children. A silent one is rare but nothing special. Do you want to see how strong he is? There you go. She unwrapped him from the cloth. And, while holding him gently, she gave Derek a little spanking to make him cry. Derek grunted a little while, staring at her in dismay. Do you want to play rough? Old hag. He thought. Fine. You just triggered my trap card. Twin flood. Activate. Derek relieved both his bowels and bladder onto the midwife. The back door attackers splattered all over her feet, while the front door flood struck her on the face and chest. Derek started giggling loudly. Well, this wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but as you can hear for yourself, this little imp is breathing just fine. The midwife handed the baby to another woman to clean him. Derek kept giggling, proud of his work. After washing her face with warm water and a cloth, the old hag moved her left index finger, drawing a circle in the air, striking it through in the middle, from right to left. Then she pronounced a single word. Ekidu. A black energy manifested on her fingertip. She proceeded to point it over her wet dress, and then over her shoes. The smell of feces and urine suddenly disappeared, along with their source. With his mouth agape in shock, Derek watched as his poop dried and crumbled, turning into dust. It was akin to watching one of those fast-forwarded videos, where in 1 minute, you could see a seed becoming a flower. Heisenberg's beard. She's not just an old midwife. She is a real magician. In the flesh, I have never been so happy in my whole 3 lives to be dead wrong. Derek was ecstatic. And not only because this world had magic, but also because as soon as he heard the word Ikidu, he had felt something clicking inside of him, as if something deep inside of him had started taking root, and suddenly he had become ingrained in the very fabric of his new reality. He started obsessively repeating the magic word in his mind, and tried to engrave every detail of the circular finger movement in his memory. Now that I'm clean, let me stop that bleeding. Dear. The healer approached the mother and placed her hands above her nether regions. Is it time for more magic? Show me. Please, Derek begged in his mind. Nana first spread her fingers wide, then started to move both arms in a circular motion, first up over her head. Then she opened her arms as much as she could before joining her hands, palm against backhand, at her navel's height. Finier, Lachat. Despite being all wrapped up, Derek tried to mimic all of her movements, step after step, memorizing every single detail he could grasp, no matter how small. A sphere of light enveloped Derek's mother's lower body, and she quickly recovered her complexion. The pale skin reverted to a healthy pink, while all the traces of pain and fatigue disappeared from her face. Once again, something clicked inside him. After the dark magic, he could clearly feel that simply by hearing the power word, a connection had been established between him and light magic. Derek could not stop grinning. And I say, if I have enough magical talent, it would mean there is actually a third hidden option. He thought, I can become a magician and live free for the first time in my life. No shackles, no responsibilities. But it's better not to get over-enthusiastic. With my luck, I could just have poor talent, or... His reasoning was abruptly interrupted when the woman who had held him until that moment handed him to his mother. Nana. Bye. Bun. He has yet to cry, or giggle. He is too quiet. With all that has happened, I'm really afraid that something is wrong with him. After those words, the room turned gloomy, afraid of being somewhat responsible for the change of mood, and quite eager to explore. Option number 3. Derek did his best baby impression. He giggled, smiled, and emitted raspberry sounds. Such allegations hurt Nana's professional pride. But it wasn't her first time with an anxious mother. She knew Alina since she was still a child, and had delivered all her babies. Nana could not deny that this delivery had been one of the most difficult in her career. The labor had lasted hours, and she had been forced to cast healing spells multiple times to stop the bleeding. When she finally could see the baby's head, she knew something was wrong. Alina was fighting with all of her strength, but the baby was limp. So, Nana had rushed and used her hands to pull out the baby as fast as she could, only to discover that he was being strangled by his own umbilical cord. After cutting and removing it, Nana had tried all of her best spells, but to no avail. For a long, terrible minute, Nana had believed the child was lost, but then the healing light had finally activated, forcing the baby to puke, clearing his airway. Then, and only then, could Nana afford the luxury of relaxing. Healing magic was no miracle. It could enhance the life force of the patient, making it easier for them to recover from an illness or heal from an injury. But it could not create life. Nana was sensitive, so she understood that Alina didn't need a lesson about magic. She just wanted to be reassured about her child's health. Worry not, my child. I can prove to you that all is well. Nana caressed Alina's cheek while smiling warmly and took Derek from her arms, removing the cloth as if she was revealing a treasure. Nana carefully adjusted Derek in the crook of her left arm. Then she circled her open right hand around him and said, Vinaya Rad 2. A small wisp of light came out of her palm, dancing around the baby before penetrating his chest. The light spread from head to toe, making him emit a dim light. See? If there was even a scratch on his body, my injury detecting spell would leave that area bleak. Your little son is fine. The energy flowing through his body was making Derek feel empowered. During his old life, he had felt like that only a few times. When he got his degrees, when he finally abandoned his parents' home, when he beat up the bullies. But all those times it had been a fleeting emotion, lasting a few seconds at best. Now it was different. It wasn't just adrenaline. Real magic, real power was coursing through every fiber of his being, making him feel invincible. So, when the spell started fading away, he could not accept that. No, come back to me. Give me my power back, Derek thought. He focused on the last strands of energy, willing for them to stay. He could not cast the spell on his own, but he could still feel the lingering power and started feeding it with his own. Derek's light stopped dimming and instead grew stronger and stronger. Nana was dumbfounded. She had never seen anything like that before. That was not how the spell was supposed to work. Derek wanted it to last forever, but a second later he fell asleep due to mana, exhaustion. The light disappeared quickly. Nana wrapped up the baby again and returned him to his mother's embrace. Nana, what was that? Alina asked, full of wonder. The old healer had no idea how to answer. Many possibilities popped up in her head, and all of them would require long explanations that would needlessly make Alina worry and maybe even force Nana to repeat the spell. It had been a long day, and she had no intention of prolonging it, even a second more than necessary. So she borrowed a line from her childhood's favorite fairy tale. My child, I think the newborn may be blessed by the light. There is no need to worry, only to rejoice. Chapter 2. A Baby Stay. Derek's first days as a baby were peaceful, but far from boring. He had no responsibilities. All he had to do was eat, sleep, poop, and the occasional baby noise or finger-grabbing routine. That left him with all the time he needed to think about his future on Earth. It was no mystery that kids had a greater potential for learning than adults, and since his family seemed human, or at least human-like, he could hope for that to be also true in the new dimension. From what he could see, his body was no different from a baby from planet Earth. He could hear his heartbeat and see his chest moving while he breathed. Even the reproductive apparatus was as he knew it. The same could be said for his new family. If it wasn't for the existence of magic, he would have simply thought to have traveled through time. But things clearly weren't that simple. Derek quickly dismissed all the "what race am I now?" hypotheses as overthinking. One of the advantages of being a baby was that ignorance was perfectly fine. When the time came, someone would teach him. He determined that he had two priorities. Number 1, learn their language. All babies are supposed to learn their native language, and he had only so much time before being considered a retard, so he could not slack off. Number 2, he had to somehow figure out magic, or at least its foundations. That also had a deadline, since his learning potential was at its peak only until his brain stopped growing. After that, he would be no different from anyone else, with the same talent and disposition for magic. He set magic as his first priority. Being considered a slow learner was much better than being weak for life and being forced to take another spin at reincarnation. Derek spent his first day in the new world, in bed, together with his mother, while his father would sleep and rest in the boy's room. Whenever someone talked to him, he paid close attention, trying to figure out common words or patterns. The rest of the time he was not eating, or the cloth diaper being changed. He would try to cast one of the 3 spells he knew: Teikidu, Venir Lakat and Venir Radtu. Every attempt was a failure. He could not feel even an iota of power inside himself. Tots comparing what he saw with what he knew from Earth's dungeons and looting. Those spells had clearly a verbal and somatic component. But that couldn't be all, or at least he hoped so. Otherwise all of his efforts would be useless until he was able to talk. Failure after failure. His anxiety grew stronger. Fear of the unknown and of tomorrow started to build up. Also, getting used to pooping and wetting himself wasn't a pleasant feeling either. Thankfully, his mother showered him with nothing but love and affection, making his day not a total loss. Despite his bias about mothers due to his previous life, Alina managed to make him feel loved and protected. That wasn't half bad at all. The final outcome of his first day was 0, progress in magic and no progress with the language. On the other hand, his mother seemed to be a good parent, and he finally learned his new name, Lif. The second day turned his world upside down. Alina, showing the strength of a wild ox, decided she was sick of resting and got up to help performing the daily chores. Lif had the opportunity to see her full figure. Despite giving birth the previous day, she was a good-looking woman in her early 20s. She was definitely well endowed in all the right places, with a fit body honed through hard work. Her shoulder blades, long hair, was of a beautiful light brown color, with shades of red all over it. Just the light of a candle made it look like there were flames dancing within. Seeing Mother with her hair down on a sunny day must be quite a sight to behold, Derek thought. Maybe it was because Lith was still a baby, or maybe because of the mother-son bonding. But Lith felt deeply proud of her. He also discovered that she did not use a bra or underpants. Once she finished dressing, Alina wrapped Lith up, making it impossible for him to move. Then Alina placed him into her sash, using it like a baby cradle so that she could easily hold him with only one arm and minimum exertion. She walked out of the small bedroom and found her older daughter, Raina, messing with the fireplace. "What, in the Great Mother's name, do you think you're doing? Raina, the sun is not even out. You should be sleeping. You know you are not allowed to mess with fire," she said with a hiss, trying to not wake up the house. "I'm sorry, Mum. I just wanted to make you all a surprise." "To make you wake up in an already warm house when breakfast was ready." Raina's face showed only sincere concern. "There is no need to worry, silly bee. Your mommy is a pro with kids," Elena said while ruffling her hair. Raina, together with her twin brother, Orpal, was the eldest child. She was 6 years old, and her blonde hair with shades of black was the reason for her moniker. Alina shooed her away from the fireplace, lighting the wood with a flick of her finger. "In Fyro, thank heavens," Lith rejoiced. "I had that weird feeling I experience when I discover a new type of magic again. This proves that I wasn't just imagining stuff." Alina sent Rena to open the window shutters to let the dawn light in while she prepared breakfast. Alina took several vegetables out of a cabinet and proceeded to chop them with a knife. Some had a familiar look to Lith, like some semi-potatoes and odd-colored carrots. The others were all a mystery. The idea of having such a breakfast made Lith almost cry. In his past life, he never liked vegetables. They were all bland tasting. No matter how much of them he ate, within half an hour he would be hungry again. Alina shoved everything inside a small copper cauldron and with the help of a hook, hung it on a metal bar over the fire. After that, she conjured water out of nowhere with a snap of her fingers and filled the cauldron. Both Lith and Rena were ecstatic, although for completely different reasons. For Lith, it meant hope. Spells could be cast without words or precise hand movements. That proved to him that there was a real chance to practice magic while still being a baby. For Rena, it was a reason for pride. Magic was common, but every time Alina cast a silent spell, it was like watching a real mage at work. "You are so amazing, Mom." Rena's eyes were full of admiration. "Will I ever be as good as you with magic?" "Course you will, silly bee," Alina replied with a kind smile, while inwardly adding, "after 10+ years of chores every single day." After a while, everyone woke up to have breakfast together. The family consisted of Raz's father, Alina, 2 daughters, Rena and Tista, and 2 sons, Orpal and Tryon. Lith could then establish with depressing certainty that there was no such thing as an indoor bathroom. From what he could see, the house consisted of a big room, used as dining room, kitchen and pantry with 3 doors that lead to the various bedrooms and nothing else. The breakfast was relatively quiet, so he had no problems learning the word for water magic when his father filled some jugs. "Joran!" After everyone left for their daily routine, Alina moved along with Lith to a rocking chair. During the morning, he had the pleasure to discover that in the new world, the daily chores like washing the dishes or cleaning the floors were all performed using magic. From her rocking chair, Alina would simply twirl her index and middle finger while reciting Bretza to generate up to 3 small whirlwinds that she would move all around the house to collect and get rid of the dust. Whenever someone would dirty the floor with earth or mud, a flick of the wrist and a magna would send it back through the same door it had been brought in. Lith was delighted, discovering how common the use of magic was. Everyone in the family, even the younger ones, would use magic to make their lives easier. When bedtime arrived, Lith was dying to try some magic. He had waited so long for his hands and feet to finally be free. Alina fell asleep almost instantly, yet Lith was impatient enough to have the impression of having waited for hours. After a full day spent thinking, he had decided to try only air magic, at least until he was confident enough in his ability to control magic. Fire was too dangerous for a novice, while water and light would easily wake up his mother. Lith could not spot any dirt to control in the dim light of the room, and he was too afraid to mess up with darkness magic until he got a better understanding of it. So, he twirled his little arm and said, "Pot, pot." Nothing happened. Lith tried and failed countless times before giving up. He didn't know how long his baby body would last before falling asleep, so he stopped despairing and started thinking. Magic was common. Whenever he heard, for the first time, an elemental magic word, something inside him would click, as if it created a connection between him and the elemental energy. Those were all good news, but he still couldn't make heads or tails about why he was always failing. He never expected to succeed on the first try, but he had thought that something would have manifested. A random tiny gust of wind, a spark of light, anything would do. He started thinking back to when the healer had filled him with power. That feeling was not new to him, but he had never experienced it so intensely. Lith searched his memory until he found the answer. It was the same sensation that he felt when he started practicing jiu-jitsu, while learning the basic breathing technique. "Well, I have nothing to lose. Let's give it a try." Lith breathed in through his diaphragm while relaxing the anus to draw the world energy in. Then he would contract the anus, holding the breath for a few seconds, to let the energy settle in before breathing out while he relaxed his whole body. Back on Earth, he had always thought that the intoxicating feeling he experienced during his first days of practice was just some kind of placebo effect. His naive young mind deluding itself that the weak could miraculously become strong just believing and practicing in all that Chimedian energy nonsense. But what if he later stopped experiencing that sensation only because his native world's energy was just too thin? After some time, Lith started to feel a tingle all around his body, and then the energy seemed to move and condense inside his solar plexus. The more he performed the breathing technique, the more clearly he could sense the energy getting stable. In his old Weddy games, mana was always blue, so he visualized a blue sphere settling inside his solar plexus. After a while, Lith felt like he was brimming with power. After holding his breath one last time, he twirled his little arm before commanding, "Ta!" The wind-generated barely tweaked his mother's hair, whereas he had aimed for the blanket, yet he could not stop grinning. This really is a great start. Chapter 3. Unrelenting Practice. dungeon the following weeks. Lith's days consisted of a strict routine. During the day, when he was all wrapped up, he would only focus on practicing the breathing technique and learning as much as he could about his family and their language. At night, he would practice magic until exhaustion made him fall asleep. Then as soon as he woke up, he would start again until Alina would get up for the day. More than once he tried taking a break, but it would never last for long. Living as a baby was not easy. On the contrary, it was very stressful. He could not speak even the words he had already understood to avoid scaring his family. He could not move. He could do nothing but watch, sleep, eat, and relieve his bowels. He was not used to being so helpless and dependent on someone else for every little thing. Too much free time would bring him to the verge of insanity. He would practice and practice, trying to adjust to his new reality without overthinking about how absurd his situation was. Lith's powers increased. So did his control. After a few weeks, he felt confident enough to try earth magic and water magic. He would always be careful, never conjuring more than a few droplets of water or manipulating a handful of dirt. He discovered that it was possible to make the elements float in mid-air, changing their shape and size by continuously spending mana. After that, he shifted his night training on focus and control rather than power. His mana was very limited, and he much preferred doing a few elaborate tricks perfectly rather than a lot of stuff at the risk of blowing his cover. No matter how common magic was, Lith doubted that a baby practicing it would be anything less than shocking, if not even terrifying. Lith was afraid of being abandoned by his family, or even worse, killed. He was once again scared of death, since he now had too much to lose. What were the odds of finding another world where magic existed? To be born as a baby in a loving family. That had. None. Die. Nada. Squat. He had to play his cards well, and play them as close to the chest as possible, before revealing even a hint of his talent. He needed to know what the standards of this world were, how much talent was considered good, how much divided being considered a genius, from being labeled a monster. His mind was constantly filled with worries, and only training would alleviate his anxiety. After 3 months, he had become good enough at silent magic to try fire magic on the fireplace. The fire was already lit, when everyone was busy talking and eating during breakfast. He tried making the flames dance at will. It ended up in failure, since the flames were too strong and the distance too big for his mana to have any effect. Yet he kept trying, since he could still sense the flow of magic going from himself to the fireplace, hence making it a good training to expand his mana sense and range. The only downside of all that training was that Lith would get hungry faster. Luckily, he was not Alina's first glutton, and she had no shortage of milk. Another month passed, and Alina started weaning him. This event was meaningful for 2 reasons. The first was Lith, noticing that food wasn't abundant in his household. So even if he still had a limited vocabulary, he could still read his parents' worried expressions every time he needed to be fed. Despite still being a cold-hearted, cynical misanthrope at his core, Lith could not help but feel guilty about it. They loved him like a child, whereas he would consider them nothing more than hosts. Like a parasite. The only exceptions were Alina and Rena, his big sister, the only one that aside from his mother would take care of him, with their constant love, affection, and care. They had managed to crack his emotional defensive wall. The more time he spent with them, the more he would consider them part of his real family, rather than just people who he was leading by the nose. He started limiting his training to not exceed the amount of food they could afford. Even that required quite a few tries to find the right amount, since too little would cause even more worry than too much. The second reason was world-changing discoveries. Being forced to stop training magic as much as possible, Lith now had free time that he dedicated to practicing the breathing technique that he named accumulation. That way, his inner energy, that he had long dubbed as mana core, grew faster to the point of hitting a bottleneck. Apparently, his body wasn't big, strong enough or both to hold an indefinite amount of mana. Lith had never noticed that before, because his baby body was rapidly growing and he had only so much time to expand his mana core. Without him realizing it, his body and mana core had developed together. But now the balance had been broken, and practicing accumulation would make every fiber of his body ache. So he was forced to stop. Luckily, he was still well fed and developing fast. So, despite not being able to perform any physical exercise, the bottlenecks would not last long. The second discovery was the result of him being forced not to practice magic or use accumulation while studying his bottleneck status. He found out that it was possible to modify the breathing technique by removing the breath-holding step. That way, the world energy would just flow in and out of his body, energizing him like a good night's sleep. Lith named this new technique invigoration. After several tries, he discovered that the world's mana could allow him to stay awake for several days, but not indefinitely. Each time he would use invigoration, the energizing effect would last less, and only sleeping would reset its effectiveness. But the most important discovery, as almost always happens, was made by chance. After adjusting his food intake, Lith's greatest enemy had become hunger, not the slight appetite that can be fixed by a candy bar or the hankering after a busy morning. It was the kind of hunger that never goes away, always lurking, even right after a meal. Even though Lith was not starving, it was something that he had never experienced. Among all the misfortunes of his first life, food had never been an issue. He had always been able to eat to his heart's content, even allowing himself to be picky about food. But now, he was so hungry that he ate every meal until the last bite, and if his body had allowed him to, he would not hesitate to lick the plate clean. When the portions were larger, it was like white noise, annoying but easily ignored. During the bad days, though, either because the rations were smaller or because he had lost himself in the practice of magic and consumed too much mana, it would become a thorn in his head. He would be so hungry that he would experience headaches all day long, often feeling lightheaded and incapable of focusing. Food would be the only thing he could think or dream about. Of course, he was not the only hungry one in the family. Aside from Elena, only his siblings, Orpal and Rena, would be tasked to feed him. And while Rena had a big heart and strived to be like her mother, Orpal was angrier and hungrier by the day. He would often daydream about the days when he and his twin sister were the only children in the house. Now he not only had to fight each day for his parents' attention, but also for food and clothes. Once he had a room all to himself, but now he had to share it with Tryon. It was just a matter of time before Lith would come to take away what little personal space he still had left. Orpal could not understand why a family as poor as his own would keep making kids. It was winter, so there was not much work to do. Hence there weren't many occasions to restock their food supplies, and they had to last until spring. It was the toughest time of the year for all the farmers' families, since the food was meant not only for men but also for the animals. Orpal was sick of seeing Lith gobbling up all the food, to the point of dubbing him Leech. Whenever it was his turn to feed the little vermin, he would take some spoonfuls for himself, but Lith was not easily bullied. As soon as he noticed the spoon was not aimed toward him, he would start to cry madly, and Alina would run to his side, foiling Orpal's plan. Lith never cried unless he needed to be fed or changed. It made their parents both really happy and paranoid about him. Since he would never cry wolf, they took every wail very seriously. That day was a really bad day for Lith. He was starving because of his growth spurt, and it was Orpal's turn to take care of him. Both their parents were out. One of the cows seemed to be suffering from frostbite. Orpal took the plate full of creamy soup for the baby and gulped down a full spoonful. Lith immediately started to cry, but there was no one to hear him. Cry all you want, Leech. Lith was now able to understand most of the common words included, Orpal's mockery. Today is just you and me. No mom in shining armor to come to your rescue. After saying that, he gulped down another one. Lith felt like he was going crazy. Once again, he was helpless. His so-called magic was useless in his time of need. What could he possibly do, aside from blowing his cover? Ventilate him? Wet him? Using fire was too dangerous. A single meal was not worth burning down a house. Lith's hunger was eating him, making his rage go above and beyond what he would have ever thought possible. Yo! He inwardly yelled, feeling so tough, robbing a child. Then he saw the third spoonful, moving toward Orpal's smug face. A good half of his meal was as good as gone. Lith's anger reached a new peak. His hatred burned like fire. You are not my brother, he inwardly yelled. You are nothing but a filthy thief. Trash. And then, instead of clicking, he felt something breaking inside of him, like a dam that could not hold the raging waters anymore. I hope you choke on that spoon, Rem. Lith waved his arm against Orpal in a final struggle. And so it happened. Lith felt the mana radiating out of his body, reaching the spoon already in Orpal's mouth, and pushing it down. Orpal started to choke, and after removing the spoon from his throat, he puked his guts out. Lith was so astonished that he almost forgot about both his rage and hunger. He had discovered something wonderful. a power that no one else in his family seemed to have. Lith had discovered spirit magic. Chapter 4. Understanding Spirit Magic. 2. Art. That time, Alina and Ra's father were coming back to the house. Upon hearing Lith's desperate cries, they had run back to check on him. When they found Orpal on the ground, puking, they understood what had happened. They already had suspicions since whenever Orpal fed Lith, he was always hungrier than usual. Now they had proof. Inside the pool of vomit, the undigested creamy soup was as clear as the day. Squote. Raz became red with anger. You little... but had to stop. His other children had returned as well. I am very disappointed in you, Paul. Orpal, said Alina, seeing that her husband was too angry to speak. From now on, Tiz. Elina will be the one feeding Lith. You can take all of her shifts in the stable. I don't think that even you could eat hay. But Mum, Orpal said, trying to defend himself. He hated cows and their smell. No buts. Young man, Raven Descender. And that is not punishment enough, Elina. Feel free to prepare one more bowl for Lith. Take the food from Orpal's share. He must learn that bad decisions have consequences. They were speaking too fast for Lith, and there were too many unknown words. But Orpal had just turned pale, so it had to be good news. Orpal started crying and apologizing. But Lith made sure to cry louder. Draj and Alina ignored Orpal's pleas and sent him to take care of the animals. After being fed with a generous serving of soup and milk, Lith could finally focus on what had happened. After days of trial and error experiments, he had grasped the basics of his newfound ability and gained a much deeper understanding of magic. Lith had discovered that when he cast an elemental spell, it actually consisted of a 3-step process. First, he would emit the mana. Then he had to mix it with the world energy that he was trying to manipulate. The last step was the hardest, controlling the spell and its effects. Spirit magic skipped the second step. It used only his own power, without borrowing elemental energy. That made it more difficult than any magic he had practiced so far, and more mana-consuming. It also required much more focus compared to normal magic. Pure mana had no physical form, so he could not rely on his eyes to manipulating its effects. All depended on his willpower and imagination. The clearer the mental image of the action he wanted the mana to perform, the better the result. Spirit magic's range was also very limited, barely reaching a meter, 328 feet radius. Despite all of its strict limitations, Lith started to practice only spirit magic. The ultimate discovery about it was that every improvement he did in spirit magic was also passed on to all other kinds of magic. He didn't need to split practicing between them anymore, so he progressed in leaps and bounds compared to before. From time to time, he would use a random elemental spell to check on his progress, reaching a new understanding of the true nature of that element. The progress Lith made allowed him to also improve his breathing techniques. Through accumulation, he could now not only perceive how his mana core changed in size with practice, but also have a rough understanding of the amount of mana contained in his body. By using accumulation, he would feed the world energy to his mana core, allowing it to expand from the size of a pinhead to that of a glass marble. Once the mana core grew to marble size, further progress could only be made when the physical body forcefully compressed the mana core back to a pinhead. Lith had no idea how the phenomenon worked and had found no way around it. Mana core and body development had to go hand in hand. There was no shortcut. Bottlenecks happened when Lith tried to use accumulation while the mana core was still at its peak size. The world energy would be rejected by the mana core, going wild through his body and damaging it. By continuously undergoing expansion and compression cycles, his mana capacity was already incomparable to when he was just a newborn. After discovering and practicing spirit magic, Lith had a much finer control of his mana, inside and outside his body. He managed to modify the invigoration technique so that when he breathed in the world mana, he would combine it with his own temporarily exceeding his limits. Then he would expand the resulting energy, moving it from the solar plexus outwards until even his body hair would be overflowing with mana. Ever since he invented invigoration, he had noticed qualitative changes to his body. Dosquo. Lith was now better at withstanding the cold and heat. T would hardly ever get sick. When his whole family would catch a cold, he would either get over it before the symptoms manifested or recover in a few days. Unless it's all a crazy coincidence. Didn't Improving invigoration is the only means at my disposal to temper my body. If I am right, this means that I can use it as a crutch until I get big enough to do physical activity. Powell. Hopefully. It should also help me overcome my bottleneck periods faster. It's a gamble, but it shouldn't do any harm. Between hunger and bottlenecks, there isn't much I can do as a 7-month-old baby. So, for his family life, it also experienced some changes during the following months. After the soup incident with Orpal, a divide opened between the brothers. Lith was vengeful by nature, and so was his brother. Sometimes, when Orpal was angry, he would call him Leech instead of Lith, since he always called him like that in his head. Every slip of the tongue would cost him a serious scolding, and when he did it while harshly arguing with his parents, even a good spanking. Orpal blamed Lith for all of his misfortunes. The little runt always giggled when he was having a hard time. The relationship between Lith and his parents instead kept getting better and better. He had already started saying babble words, making sure to say Mama when Alina embraced him and Dada whenever Raz came near him. If this world is even a bit similar to Earth's middle age, it's better to stay in my old man's good book until I am self-sufficient. This was Lith's reasoning. He was still very afraid of father figures, and the two of them didn't have a great relationship anyway. 20. Letting his wife and eldest daughter spend the most time with the baby. To his defense, he had just wrongly assumed that Lith was too little to notice and that they would have time to catch up later in the future like he did with his other sons. Prade really loved him, and Lith never ceased to amaze him. He couldn't remember him crying for no reason. Not even when teething, if someone bumped into his cradle or raised their voice while Lith was asleep. 7. He would not make a sound, just look around before going back to sleep. Lith grew increasingly fond of Rena. She was more like a loving aunt than a sister to him. He could see himself in her, taking care of her little brother as he did with Carl. He would have loved to express this affection, but all he could do was smile and laugh as soon as he saw her and call her Lala. She was Fart, the only one besides his parents to have a babble name. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to her. And so, time went by. After 6 months from his arrival, Lith was put on the ground for the first time and started to crawl under strict supervision. Took. At the 9th month, he started to walk and graduated himself from babble words to real ones. On the day of his birthday, after discovering they had birthdays in the New World too, he allowed himself to use simple phrases and started to make questions to complete his vocabulary, knowing nothing about babies. It was very stressful, finding the right timing for every little thing. Luckily, Lith could always resort to cheating to find out the proper time for him to learn to do something. He was already capable of understanding most of what he could hear, so he would always be open to suggestions. If Alina was dying for him to finally say Mommy instead of Mama, he would wait a couple of days before making it happen. If Raz cheered for Lith running to him, he did. The real problem was paying attention to everything Raz, Threna and Alina said, while seeming completely oblivious to their words. Another problem was that once they let him roam free in the dining room, they also gave him small wooden toys, expecting him to play and explore his surroundings. Lith already knew the dining room like the back of his hand, and there was not much to see in the first place. Yet he had to pretend to be curious about it. That was the hardest thing he had ever done since becoming a baby, and it scared him to death. He had no clue how a child would explore such a bland environment, and his paranoia about blowing his cover made him sweat bullets. Seeing the expectation in their eyes, he started from the nearest thing, the fireplace. The fire was not lit. The logs were cold and covered in ashes. When he got closer, Raj stopped him. This is the fireplace. Now it's safe. But fire is bad. Fire hurts. No touching it. Never. Lith looked at him, seemingly confused, before trying to put his hand in the ashes. Just had, blocking him. Fire is bad. No, touching it. Never. His father repeated. Lith stared in his eyes like he was deeply in thought, before asking, Fire, bad. Yes, very bad. Raxgray relied, while nodding, Okay. Lith moved away from the fireplace and got close to the table. When he tried climbing up a chair, almost falling down with it, Alina ran to his rescue. Good gods. This little one sure likes danger. Seeing their increasingly worried expressions, Deslete, Lith believed to have found a way out of his torment. He would keep putting himself in danger, trying to climb on the table or go into the kitchen, rummaging through pots and knives. They quickly decided that his adventure time was over. They made him sit on an old cloth spread over the wooden floor and gave him toys to play with while they recovered from the stress. He had a little wooden horse, some kind of cart, and an odd-looking dog thingy. Playing was much easier for him. Lith did not need to create stories or explain what he was doing. He could just use playtime to practice spirit magic. Lith would actually never use his hands to move the toys, making them float as close as possible to his fingers. He really enjoyed those moments. Lith could finally openly rejoice, scream and laugh any time he made a new discovery or a breakthrough, and all his parents would see was a happy child lost in his fantasies. Who would have ever thought that such a quiet little fellow could have such a vivid imagination? Raz said with a big, proud smile on his face. Look at him. All he has is just some old toys. Yet it looks like he has the whole world in the palm of his hand. Chapter 5. Growing Pains. The following years weren't easy on Lith. He was finally allowed to ask a lot of questions, filling most of the holes, and his vocabulary, and starting to finally learn about his family and the new world he learned that they were living in. The village of Lutia, which was part of Carter, the county of Lustria, which in turn was part of the Griffon kingdom. His parents knew about the neighboring countries by name only. They knew nothing about things were outside the village, nor did they care about it. In their eyes, the king was some sort of mythical beast, whereas they put all of their faith and worries in Count Lark. Not only did he administer justice and taxes in the county, but he would also always take part in Lutia's spring festival as guest of honor. His parents never mentioned to their children anything about magic, wars, or history. They only told them tales that, even in this new world, could be easily dismissed as bedtime stories. All of their fables were filled with Eventag, beautiful princesses, valiant heroes, and villainous tyrants. Lith was truly dissatisfied by such little information. He wanted to know what was the planet's name and what stage of scientific development the human race had reached. He wanted to learn about the history of magic, the lore, the legends, anything that could give him at least a clue about what to expect from his new life. Unfortunately, it was clear they knew little more than gossip. To make matters worse, he couldn't pose questions he was not even supposed to think about. At least his family tree was quite simple to understand. Elena and Raz had married very early, even by village standards, when they were barely 16. Being an only child, Raz had inherited his father's farm where they were currently living. Elena had gotten pregnant shortly after the marriage, giving birth to the twins Rena and Orpal. Then she got pregnant again every 2 years. That meant that Raz and Elena were currently 25 years old, Rena and Bay, Orpal 8 years old, Tryon 6 years old, Tista 4 years old, and finally, Lith 2 years old. In fact, most of that information was leached from his siblings' questions. Lith was mostly limited to a what's this, why is that kind of question, spending more and more time with the Kai. Rest of his family, he also discovered why, despite his father owning such a nice farm with its own barn and hen house, they had so many problems putting food on the table. Tista was born with a congenital condition that prevented her from doing any physical exertion and also made her prone to illness. Fast pacing was enough to leave her out of breath. She would cough from time to time, and when things were about to turn for the worse, the cough would become violent. At that point, one of her parents would have to run to the village to let Nana visit and heal her. She could not really cure her, only alleviate the symptoms and return Tista to her natural state. While a checkup wasn't expensive, the Sebelan spleen tubulan treatment was also, even if Raz did go to pick her up and then brought Nana back home, it would still cost extra. Doing a round trip meant her losing business, so she demanded compensation. It was the constant need for the healer to put such a strain on their budget. Lith felt very sorry for her. Despite not having spent much time with Tista, she was precious to both Elena and Rena, and that was more than enough to make her precious to him too. He felt helpless, cursing his inability to ever practice light and darkness magic. Light magic required a patient until he gained a solid grasp of how it worked and what was this world's human anatomy. He would not dare to put anyone's health at risk. Darkness magic was another story. Lith had only seen it once, and no one in his family used it. The only time he had seen it in action, he had clearly felt the destructive power it held. He was also biased against it, since, on Earth, dark magic would always be associated with evil practices and undead. So he had no desire to dabble with something potentially horrifying. Lith could only live on, hoping to eventually get some training in magic, while enduring the madness he was getting. Used to calling family life, he had to be lively, but not too much. He had to be curious, but not too much. He had to run around, but never get out of the door. His parents were never satisfied. If he tried to sit in a corner meditating, they would worry because he was too quiet or too lazy. If he tried to move around or help them, he would be scolded for getting in the way. They refused to teach him core magic. Ferd was the name of the lesser spells they used in their daily life, prohibited him from learning them. Lith could not go outside without being accompanied by someone. He could not get near to the fireplace, nor could he ask too many questions. Everything was basically prohibited until he grew up. More than once, Lith wanted to scream, "I may be biologically young, but I am actually the oldest in here, damn it." But all he could do was suck it up and obey. His feud with Orpal never resolved, and he could clearly feel Tryon's hostility on his brother's behalf. Clearly, Orpal was for Tryon what Rena was for Lith, his role model. Unlike Orpal, Tryon would not completely ignore him, even when their parents were absent. Yet Lith could clearly see that every time his brother helped him, it was just to be polite. There was no kindness between them. Lith quickly started to ignore him in return. "I have already spent half of my old life being worried about dysfunctional family members. Been there, done that. Thank you, but no thank you. If you want to be a jerk, be my guest. I don't give a damn about you." These were his thoughts about the matter, so he let things fester. Once he became 3 years old, he could not take it anymore. The boredom caused by the cold winter months when he was basically stuck at home 24/7, aggravated by the constant hunger, was about to drive him insane. It was a stormy afternoon and the family was gathered around the fireplace. Alina was teaching her daughters how to sew. Raz was teaching Orpal how to carve wood, while Tryon and Lith were only allowed to watch. They were still too little to handle any sharp object. Even sewing was off limits. Lith had already asked, baffling his father and flattering his mother. "You are too little, and your hands are still too clumsy," she replied. Alina was right, though. Lith's body felt even clumsier than his old one. Before he had started practicing martial, just the thought of all the lost muscle memory was enough to make him cry. So he patiently waited until Raz finished instructing Orpal, and then Lith mustered all of his courage. He asked his father to teach him how to write and count. Raz was flabbergasted. "You are too young. Usually, kids wait until they are 6 years old to go to school and learn. Don't you think it's boring?" That was Enki, the philosophy every man in his lineage had always upheld. Boring? What could possibly be more boring than sitting here doing nothing, like yesterday and the day before? And probably tomorrow too. "Please, Daddy. Try me. I beg you. Please. Please. Please." Raz didn't know how to say no. Lith had never asked anything for him before. Even when Lith is still hungry, if he notices that there is no more food, he never asks for more. He thought, he's so unlike Orpal. "I don't know if it's Lith that's too good, or I'm just spoiling Orpal too much." He really wanted a way out, but Alina was already staring at him. Her hands never stopped sewing, nor her mouth explaining to the girls what they were doing wrong, but her eyes were clearly set on him. "Damn it, what can I say? Learning does not even require dangerous tools. That's it for tools. I'm such a moron sometimes." Raz looked into Lith's puppy eyes, his heart squeezing as if in a vice. But he still replied, "I'm sorry, son, we have nothing you could possibly write on. So, I can't teach you." Lith had considered things thoroughly before asking, so he had already a solution at hand. He picked the biggest tray they had and filled it with the tepti ashes collected in a bucket beside the fireplace. "Now we can write as much as we Raz was amazed by Lith's ingenuity, and so was Alina. He was about to object again when he noticed that the stare had turned into a frown. Her hands were moving too fast, and that meant trouble for him. There was a storm outside, so he could not run away from the one that was brewing inside. He had to admit defeat and yield. Where do you want to start? Raz could only hope that Lith would get bored fast and let him return to his leisure. Count, Lith promptly replied. So Raz and Bo sat on the floor beside him and started drawing lines in the ash. Lith was ecstatic. The numbers they used had a different shape from the Arabic numerals, but aside from that they were identical in use. Even the calculation methods were the same. So, he kept the new numbers in the upper Rakshbram, doing the multiplication tables. He could actually do such simple math in his head. But he needed to engrave the new numbers, and both his mind and body. Once he finished, Lith started taking requests from his audience, and when Orpal sarcastically asked, "How much is 124 times 11?" he quickly replied with 1364, leaving them all speechless. Alina could not help herself, standing up and lifting Lith up in a big hug. "My little genius, I'm so proud of you." In less than 1 hour he had mastered what it would take others a full year to do. Rena and Tista soon joined her in the petal embrace, congratulating their little brother, while the male side of the Praffer family was still flabbergasted. In rural areas, people learned how to count only to not get ripped off when they sold or bought merchandise. They remembered only addition and subtraction, whereas they soon forgot about useless things like multiplication and division. Reading and writing required more time, but it was equally simple. Lith already knew most of the words and how to spell. He only needed to learn the Sav alphabet and memorize it to be able to and write. Once again, his family was stunned, and Pad, the only one not rejoicing with them, was Orpal, left alone with his envy and scorn.